Hello, I'm Stuart.
And I'm Jack.
And we're hosting our Big Dirty Nerd podcast. I think this is episode 4?
5. Definitely episode 5.
You look puzzled now.
No, I'm fine. It's definitely 5.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
No, it is definitely 5.
Well, hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm 5 times good.
What does that mean?
I don't know. How are you? You finished all your uni work.
I've done my exams for this, essays for this semester, so I'm feeling pretty elated.
Yeah, I don't feel any different because I have no deadline to work to, which is in a weird, twisty way kind of depressing because you don't have that moment of elation, but you know.
I'm just full of endorphins right
post-grad life. But, it's Christmas soon, so Christmas is Christmas.
Christmas is Christmas. Okay, let's talk about the news. So this week we had the Guardians of the Galaxy trailer come out. What do you think of that?
Did I think of that?
Yeah, what did you think?
I thought it was really cool.
Sorry, I should say Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
Volume 2, yeah.
First
in case you think we're 3 years behind.
Yeah. I thought it was really good.
I thought it was really good too. And also, definitely one of those trailers that should be shown at DC because literally no plot at all.
Yeah, that was the thing that I thought was significant, is that you have quite a generic looking CGI monster and then everything else is purely just them talking to each other. Yeah. It's about character relationships.
Which I quite like because it's clearly if that's indicative of the film, then we're going to get a lot of character. It's going to be very character driven and the characters are so... not is developed the right word, but they're so, we know what they are, they're so iconic almost.
Sure.
That that's all we need. We need a bit of Rocket just being silly and Groot being tiny, then that sells it to us.
A reminder of what they're like, so you can be like, oh, and then we've got this new character Mantis coming into the mix.
Yeah,
how's she going to disrupt the team identity? The whole thing with Gamora and Star-Lord being a kind of on again, off again couple. How's she going to spin that? Seems cool, but also interesting because we know that's going to be a bit disrupted anyway because Michael Rooker's Yondu and Karen Gillan's Nebula are both supposed to be members of the team this time round. So the team's going to go up to...
two sort of old bad guys.
Yeah.
Ish.
So a team of 8 people, I think.
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I mean, if you count Groot, but anyway, I love Groot. The wee babby Groot.
The wee babby Groot is a cool thing, and it's also it'd be a really interesting dynamic for the team, I think, because Groot last time, as great as he was, to continue that is almost like getting into the Hulk problem of if the guy is basically invincible, how do you just not use him all the time?
Sure.
So if your biggest gun is now yay high, I'm holding 2 fingers about 6 inches high, so for those not watching us, which is no one,
everyone who's listening to this is not here in the room, but Jack was indicating about a space of about 6 to 8 inches there.
Yeah. That completely changes the dynamic of the whole team, which could be quite interesting because it's instead of pass me that really tall thing, no one can do that now.
I guess that's kind of a strange hypothetical.
Yeah, but you know what I was thinking. I'm just trying to think of a tall thing that Groot can do.
This is a weird niche conversation.
Yeah. The only thing though about the fact it's all character driven is that it could be annoying in the sense that it runs out of plot or there isn't enough plot. Having good established characters is half the battle, but if it's just joke after joke after joke after emotional bit after team building after team breaking up after team getting back together after joke after happy conclusion and there's no story, there's no storyline through it, that is sometimes a bit of a plot or a pit hole that I think Marvel gets into sometimes.
Yeah, I know what you mean, where it feels like there's almost no stakes because while everyone cares about each other, there's nothing actually threatening to any of them.
Yeah,
I think that's a real problem, is that you have characters who are oh no, the big bad thing's gonna happen. It's but you're clearly gonna resolve that.
Hopefully there will be more to it than that. I think because they've James Gunn, if you follow on Facebook or Twitter or anything, he has been going on about how he's quite excited by this one and there's lots of different elements going on to it, and we still haven't seen Kurt Russell in it. And I'm sure we haven't seen Elizabeth Debicki. She's supposed to be in it. She's supposed to have a major role who we still haven't seen. Okay.
Who's Elizabeth Debicki for people who don't know?
Elizabeth Debicki. She was in the Night Manager and she's a rising star this year.
Okay.
Tall and blonde, very good. But she's in it. I just know she's in it, but it's one of those characters you just haven't seen yet. Don't know how Nebula ties into it. Don't know how Yondu ties into it.
Yeah.
So hopefully there's. Yeah, there will be a story, but hopefully there's a good story, because that's one of the things that I think Guardians did really well, is that I think it's the best example so far of introducing an Infinity Stone that isn't shoehorned in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also one of those things that if you look at Guardians of the Galaxy 1, what it was is that the plot services the characters, in establishing the team rather than the characters servicing the plot. You know what I mean? It wasn't the thing of, we need to get from A to B. We need to have an Infinity Stone at the end of this film going somewhere out into the world. I mean, that did happen, but it was an act of convenience rather than the whole point.
The Infinity Stone was from the beginning of the film all the way through. That was the thing that was quite clever. I mean, we didn't know what it was. It was just an orb, and then it became the Infinity Stone, or it opened up to reveal the Infinity Stone.
Sure.
Yeah.
So yeah,
cool. So
looking forward to it.
Thumbs up for Guardians of the Galaxy, but interestingly, there isn't that much more to talk about. I don't know if there's any secret things you spot other than Mantis, who's an interesting new character. There wasn't anything, because quite a lot of it was just an extension of the teaser trailer.
Yeah. I don't think there was anything new as far as I could tell.
And I think an interesting new way to sell a film, actually.
Just reminding you what you already know.
Well, yeah, reminding you what you already know, and also like proving that you want a little bit more. So I reckon they'll do one more trailer, and that'll be a plot trailer, and then I think that'll do it.
Yeah,
if you say,
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Other bit of news, TV wise, of the day that we're recording this right now, there has been a 10-second or I think 30-second teaser trailer for Spider-Man: Homecoming, and that said that basically there'll be a full trailer coming.
Yeah, so probably by the time that you hear this, the full trailer will be out, and we'll probably record a full trailer reaction next week as well. But what's your thoughts? What do you think about it? He's got his cool little web things, doesn't he?
He's got, so the big thing that I love the most about the trailer is the way they approach Spider-Man's costume, which is with the kind of webbing armpit design from the classic Steve Ditko
so like it goes
70s
from just under his elbow to like by his hip,
to his waist really.
Yeah.
And that's Steve Ditko's original incarnation of Spider-Man had that cool design, and they've brought it back recently in comics as well, which makes me think that there was presumably an executive decision saying, by the way, this is going to be in the film, so put it back in the comics. But hey, that's still cool. And I just love it. It shows that they're really paying attention to the origins of the character and, the original tone of Steve Ditko's classic run.
Yeah, I know. And I think there's a lot of Ditko coming back. Do you think there may be, because obviously like Ditko was a huge influence on Doctor Strange. I mean, all of the extra dimensional stuff was entirely Steve Ditko, right down to Dormammu. Spoilers.
I mean,
that's fine. We talked about it before.
It's like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I know. But for people who are coming on just now, which I'm sure there are, because we're up to 37 likes.
Yeah, hooray!
No, we're more than 37. I think.
Know.
Anyway, like our Facebook page, by the way. We have a Facebook page now.
It's called Jack and Stuart's Big Darn Podcast, as I'm sure you know by now.
Give it a like
because you're listening to this already. So
But yeah, I think it's quite cool to see maybe influences that are other than just Stan Lee. I mean, I know obviously they touch on major artists and other comic book writers in terms of storyline-ish. I mean, like Civil War is a Mark Miller book, not
and you've got
Stan
Frank
Lee
Miller's
book.
Daredevil.
Yeah, exactly. But almost like they're adaptations rather than direct lifts. I think like Steve Ditko, other than Stan Lee, seems to be the only one so far who's had a direct, like, this is so indicative of a single person, which is cool.
I mean, that's the thing. If you look at the original, going back to Guardians of the Galaxy, if you look at the original concepts for Star-Lord's costume, they are exactly the same as the ones in the Abnett and Lanning 2008 Annihilation run, which is really, I think, a fantastic costume. I'm slightly annoyed they got rid of the helmet, actually, for the final design. But then again, I guess making him look a bit too much like a kind of stormtrooper guy.
Yeah. And like, also, I guess the thing is sort of like, if you're going to have someone who's as good looking as Chris Pratt, then don't cover his face the entire time.
You have to have a bit of hair.
Yeah, you got to have, like, otherwise it could just be anyone.
Yeah, that's true.
But what do you think about the sort of thing they're going the storyline they're going down with Tony Stark giving him all his technology?
I think it's interesting in terms of the way that it would construct like Tony Stark, not necessarily as an antagonist, but as more of a neutral character in the MCU from now on. Because like he definitely was I don't know you could call him the bad guy, but he was the authority figure in Civil War.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rumors saying that he's going to be the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. now.
Oh, okay. Like they did in the comics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I could see that working, but it does make Spider-Man a kind of interesting character on the back of that because he's just a kid.
Yeah.
For him to be kind of government funded would be really weird.
Which is kind of cool because he's because they deliberately wanted to cast him as a kid, like deliberately. I think like Marvel are apparently planning on having him in school for the next 4 years, which is longer than even the comics ever had him in school for. And this new film coming up, Spider-Man Homecoming is supposed to have a John Hughes sort of feel, so like Ferris Bueller and The Breakfast Club, and much more sort of like not romantic comedy, but teen comedy sort of style of thing, upbeat. And like Tom Holland, I just think is amazing casting, and he's so good in this. And like if you see this little teaser trailer, quite a lot of it is almost as if he's filming on his phone, and seeing like, oh my god, it's almost like in a way it's like an unboxing of like, what's this new kit I've got, and then you see his reaction to it. And I think that's kind of great because like for all the mythology and the greatness and the coolness and the whatever about Spider-Man, he is that one superhero that almost every kid had or loved.
He's just
and I think like being able to tap into that sort of like fun kidness is something that is missing from the MCU.
Totally.
I mean, it's not super dark, super gritty, but it is kind of fun to have that sort of like childish joy coming out of it.
And I would say it's been missing from Spider-Man films in the past because they focus too much on the whole like coming of age thing rather than like being a kid.
Yeah, the other thing about Tony Stark, I think is really interesting, is that if you see in Iron Man 3, he has that relationship with that kid in the garage, and it's kind of like, it's a really nice, interesting thing they've done, which makes, you know, Tony Stark is just good with kids. I think that's a really cool thing, and that makes so much sense as to why Spider-Man would be on his side in Civil War. And it's not because of his politics or his idea behind the Registration Act, it's because he's a kid, and obviously he'll go with whoever he wants. And for as great as a character as Steve Rogers is, he's not nearly as approachable as Tony Stark is in some cases. And I think that's just kind of a cool character bit he's got.
And I think it's a really interesting thing in looking at the whole concept of the MCU in general, is that you have motivation for characters coming from completely different films. So you might not, you know, there's quite a high probability that some of the people who saw Civil War didn't see Iron Man 3. And I would question whether or not that means you missed something. But it certainly makes it more of a complete body of work. Yeah,
exactly. It's a nice, like, there's a lot of subtle through lines as well as the obvious, like, Thanos coming to kill the Earth sort of major storyline. Which is kind of, it's nice, I think. Speaking of nice.
Speaking of nice.
Great
segue.
I know. I'm segueing into something that's not nice. The Last of Us Part 2 is coming out. That was the other thing that came out this week, and it's not nice in the sense of like it's pretty horrible and scary game. It's a very dark, bleak story, but I think I sort of wanted it, but it was one because I'm a huge fan of the first game, The Last of Us. We don't really talk about video games as much, but this is just a little thing that I wanted to flag up. But The Last of Us Part 2, when I saw the trailer, I didn't realize how much I wanted another one, because it was sort of that sort of thing of like The Last of Us has an almost perfect ending in the sense of like it's conclusive but also leaves you really wanting more. And you go, oh, as soon as you finish, you go, oh, I really want another one. And then there's years go by and you hear no news of a sequel, and you go, you know what, I've made my peace with it. I'm quite happy to replay this game. And then all of a sudden there's like, here we are, Last of Us Part 2, and it looks like it's been a bit of a time jump. So we left Ellie and I've forgotten them. Joel, the main character, Joel. We leave them, and Ellie's maybe about 13, and now she looks to be around about 18, 19. So sort of like you've missed the coming of age, and she's now she's still young, but she's an adult, and it's like a slightly more developed and aggressive Ellie, whereas Joel is almost like kind of a beaten, tired old man. And I think that could be really, because you play as Joel all the way through The Last of Us, and I just thought that was a really interesting character to play, because yes, he can survive, but he's not necessarily like bulking mass superhero sort of character. He is just an ordinary man who, like, the whole nature of the game is finding stuff as you go, and like, so you have melee weapons that come from broken up bits of chair or like left behind baseball bats, rather than him having like a standard weapon that, like, you know, you would have through, like, it would become as part of his character. His whole thing is that he collects things and drops them off and picks them up as he goes, rather than having an established character, because his whole point is that he's just supposed to be making his way through this world. And then seeing him now as a much more older, much more beaten up old man, it's kind of a against the norm playing character. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't even seen the trailer for the second one, so I don't know what to think, and I've never played the first game. But from the sounds of things, I mean, I know it's an incredibly like hyped series, and I probably do need to play it at some point. But from the sound of things, it's very character driven, just on like, here are two people in a nightmarish scenario. Now they have to survive. It
does depend on what you want out of a game, because it's made by the same people who make Uncharted, and I do love the Uncharted games, but they do have some criticism because it essentially almost follows the same pattern as a Mario game of like you get from point A to point B, and there's no other way around it. And yeah, you have a shoot 'em up element of like there are obstacles in their way, but it's not like a sandbox. It's not like you can go wherever you want. Sure, there's no creative freedom at all in the game. But if you like your games incredibly narrative based, then this is a really great game for you. And I love sandbox games, but I do love a story. I love getting invested in a character and becoming a character and sort of playing as that person, and like it makes an interesting playing experience, because obviously like when you are playing Joel, it's your actions through an avatar, and then you do stuff that however you want to do them, but then you cut to a cutscene and then Joel does something bad or does something that you immoral that you don't want to do, and you go, oh, I don't know if I like this character anymore, and yet you still have to play as him. That's the thing that is interesting about these narrative-driven games, is that you have to play with someone that you don't necessarily agree with. Yeah.
Cool. Well, it sounds like an interesting one to watch out for.
Yeah, no, it's really, really cool. I know you didn't really... I remember when it first came out, you did shit on The Last of Us a bit, having never played it. But
I was like that. You were a different person.
I think you read one review and you're like, it's not the Citizen Kane of games. Fuck you.
I mean, the idea of a Citizen Kane of games is a weird concept in the first place.
If you say that to any game, I think you kind of damn it a little bit, because it's sort of like, first of all, let it be its own thing. And also, don't say it's the best game in the world ever, because it's not, because there will always be better games than it. But just say that it's a good game, and that's fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Rather than saying, like, nothing will beat it. And you're like, great.
Okay.
You know what, then I'm just going to give up playing games now.
Yeah, there's no more games to be made. Yeah. I'm just going to play The Last of Us for the rest of my life.
The last of the game. No, never mind.
Okay. Let's move on to our main feature this week.
Yeah, okay.
Which is our kind of chat about one of our favourite creators, a guy called Rick Remender, who's a writer who has worked for, I think, I'm not sure he's actually worked for DC, but he's definitely worked at Dark Horse, Image, and Marvel.
He used to be an artist and a storyboard artist, because he lived in San Francisco. I don't know if he was involved with stuff like Pixar, but Pixar is based in San Francisco, so there's a lot of like animation companies and studios and stuff that come out of San Francisco. So he did get into comics via drawing, and I'll need to check it out, but he may have done something with DC. But I mean, I think if he did or not, it's irrelevant. I think the thing that's sort of, for me, defines Rick Remender is this: he has this incredible way of telling a story visually and telling a story through images, which I think comes from his roots in a storyboard artistry.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't actually know that about him, but you can definitely see it in the way that he uses the image, in terms of like, he's one of those comic creators that I think his medium by necessity is comics. It's not the kind of thing that you could read a script of his and be like, oh yeah, I get it. Yeah. You know, it's the same thing, because he works so much on character expression and kind of movement.
Yeah. There is something, I was going to talk about this maybe later on when we talk about some of his titles, but like I reread a book by him recently, and it did just strike me how visual it was, in the pure sense of like it could not be done any other way. Like this would work as a film, but only just, and it would not work as a novel. Yeah, because you need to have the way he works. It's so visual, and it's so we'll try and explain a bit, because I want to talk about the technique that he uses in his layouts. Well, that's also Greg Ticini, one of his artists, but in the layouts of panels and the way he tells a story from an image is genius. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
And so people who maybe don't read comics as avidly as we do and are just listening to this, if you wanted to try, well, first of all, he's my favorite author, definitely.
Yeah.
So if you want to just try something random at Marvel, try and find something that's written by him. And if you want to get into independent comics, I think he's the one to go for. He is really, really good, and I just think, first of all, really accessible, and also one of the best for me.
Yeah, I think. Why don't we talk a bit about the themes that he uses in his work? Because I think one of the things that I find most approachable about his writing is particularly the way that it deals with like the concept of family and the familiar. In most of his work, there's some element of backstory wherein character motivation comes from their family and like how they're treated or want to be treated by their family, which is really cool, especially in his work for Marvel, which you don't normally see that kind of thing. It's usually for superhero stories, and there's nothing wrong with this, but you don't see so much character motivation coming from real world issues. It's usually, oh no, the villain's doing something bad, I have to stop them, or someone's trying to kill me, I've got to figure out who it is, or that kind of thing. It's quite
there's a narrative drive rather than a character drive.
Exactly, and he manages to flip that on its head most amazingly with his runs on. I'm going to talk about Venom specifically and Captain America.
Well, I haven't read either of them, so do you want to just go ahead and I'll cut in?
Yeah, sure. So just to clarify, I probably will be doing a fair few synopsis-based spoilers. Like, so if you were to read like on Wikipedia what his run was like, you'll probably get this from here. But for Venom, he basically deals with the host of Venom, who is a guy called... I've forgotten his name. Flash Thompson.
Flash Thompson, yes.
Flash Thompson, who lost his legs in Vietnam.
Yep.
And has Venom as a kind of agent of his that he uses to regrow his legs and can become a kind of CIA operative.
Just to be clear, Venom is the name of a famous Spider-Man villain, but it was first appeared when Spider-Man got the black suit. So the black suit is the Venom symbiote.
Yeah. He's now like a big Spider-Man villain, but he's no longer really. They've kind of repurposed him into a kind of anti-hero.
Yeah.
And the thing that really works about Venom in Flash Thompson's character version of him, or sorry, what am I saying? Rick Remender's version of Venom is that he's based on this guy struggling to reconcile with his family and his ex-wife while simultaneously struggling with things like alcoholism, and the addiction to the symbiote reflects that. So the more he acts out as Venom, the more they have to create countermeasures, the more he becomes unhinged, his family breaks down, and his alcoholism takes over. It has a really cool antagonistic relationship with the Hobgoblin as well,
right?
And Jack-O-Lantern, both appear in the series, and they're really, really horrible villains.
Yeah,
but Remender writes them excellently.
So there are a couple of storylines in Marvel where alcoholism and sort of like a problem with oneself is a major storyline. So stuff like in Daredevil, Frank Miller's Daredevil, there's a whole big problem where he sort of like lots of bad things get thrown his way. Like his house gets blown up, he nearly dies. He almost but rather than him being physically attacked, he's almost morally attacked, and he's like everything that's wrong with his life gets broken and piled on top of him and so on. And there's a similar thing in Ant-Man where Hank Pym, like there's a storyline where he becomes almost insane and he beats up his wife and he becomes an alcoholic, and there's also Tony Stark, I think, is a famous one for he used to be an alcoholic, and there's a whole origin, really. There's a whole arc about how he breaks his alcoholism and goes sober. They touch on it a little bit in Iron Man 2, by the way, just in case you're interested. So how do you think this differs from that? Is it the same sort of arc, or is the same sort of like
I think it's much less redemptive. I think it's very. I think the thing that is a credit to Remender is that he manages to make everything set in a superhero world somehow seem bleak and depressing and nightmarish. Yeah. And Venom is kind of the perfect character for that, because it's Venom as a symbiote. It's called a symbiote because it reflects what the user brings to it. So in his original appearance with Spider-Man, it was kind of, a bit
cockiness,
Yeah, and then it goes to Eddie Brock, who's a psychopath and becomes all evil, and now it's with Flash Thompson, and it becomes this kind of weird amalgam of the two, which is really cool. And I think, there's just a lack of any kind of moral righteousness within the story, which is really interesting in a superhero comic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so in Captain America...
Yeah,
what happens here?
In Captain America, it's following on from Ed Brubaker's run for like 10 years, during which time you have Civil War and the death of Captain America and then the rebirth of Captain... Like, Brubaker did so much with the character.
Yeah, and Bucky becomes Cap for a bit.
Yep. And so I think by necessity, Remender wanted to take the character in a completely different dimension, quite literally. So what he does is he takes Captain America to another dimension, which is a kind of nightmarish alien world, and he finds himself raising a child in this nightmarish scenario, and it's like the testimony of like Captain America as a character, but also just fatherhood in general was a really, really cool theme for him. And at the end of the run, he leaves. He's pulled back into the real world, leaving this character, his child, in Dimension Z.
Yeah,
and it's all about like the heartbreak of being an adult and like having to deal with your child going off and doing its own thing, and also the consequences of like grief and loss. Yeah. Really, really amazing and emotional artwork by
Is it not? Is it Romita Jr.?
It's John Romita Jr.
And Immonen. Stuart Immonen.
And then Stuart Immonen takes on after that. After that point, it's dealing with. That's the point when Captain America gets serum soldiered as well.
Yeah.
And then you have Falcon takes over the role.
Yeah.
So quite a lot of development on its own within this quite limited space of time, which I think deals a lot with like. Yeah, the idea of...
Yeah, no, it's one I definitely want to read. I'm going to try and pick it up for Christmas, I think. Like his 5 trades, I think he wrote. So not that long.
So like probably about 36 issues.
Yeah.
So like 3 years.
Yeah.
Which is not a long time, but he did a lot with the character.
Yeah.
Definitely did nuanced him and made him really interesting.
I think that's something that I really think defines Rick Remender, is that he will find influences in places for comic books that no one else would do. So an obvious way I would go approach a book is by looking at contemporary film or famous adventure storylines or stuff like that. So, for example, I'm just reading Uncanny X-Men by Chris Claremont right now, and the Brood saga is so obviously influenced by Alien and Aliens.
Yeah.
It's a great story in its own right, but you can see where it comes from. Whereas Rick Remender seems to like, first of all, I think he's hugely influenced by like hip hop music and rap music, but this storyline sounds a wee bit like a Razorhead in the sense of like a really bizarre and dark twisted take on fatherhood.
Totally.
And it's that really interesting thing that you're saying about the character drive of like building from something really dark and almost not giving them a way out at the end. Like he uses depression as a way of defining a character and also showing their strengths, because Cap does have to continue on, but it's a real character development. And I just think that's a really cool way of breaking down a character that like he's not a super soldier anymore, literally, by the end of it all. But he's also not, he's not flag waving, patriotic. I mean, he hasn't been for a while, I don't think. But it's just sort of like that's really cool. That's the way to get a character back. It's not by reinventing him or rebooting him or doing this or doing that.
It's find out who they are without the superpowers. Really, what is their motivation? What do they do? And in the everyday. Really.
And it makes for really good plot, I think, because it comes from plot comes from a different place, because plot will follow character rather than bending a character into a plot. Like, it wasn't as if Rick Remender goes, I want Captain America to go to space or go to a different dimension. It's like he wants Captain America to experience I'm by the way speculating here. I don't know.
Right, you're absolutely right.
But like, so he wants Captain America to get to this point in his development, or to show this sort of element of him. And so the best way he does it, because Rick Remender deals almost, but not quite, but almost exclusively with science fiction, he moves him to a completely different place.
And sees how he works on his own or with just one other character.
Yeah.
So really, really fascinating.
Really good.
Worth picking up. What do you want to talk about?
Well, let's just keep going about Marvel for a wee bit. So one of the best runs I think I've read is his Uncanny runs, and there are 2. So there's Uncanny X-Force and Uncanny Avengers, both of which run completely into each other. So for those of you who don't know, X-Force has its tradition from like late 80s, early 90s, which is a sort of a Cyclops from the X-Men obviously sets up a elite kind
of a black
task force, like a X-Men Black Ops team. So X-Men have always been sort of like promoting the goodwill of mutants and mutant kind and defending against evil mutants and any threat to humanity as well as mutant kind. Whereas, and there's always been that nice debate about like, why are we risking our lives with people who hate us? So first of all, there's an argument for not doing anything at all, and then there's also an argument of why aren't we doing enough? Why don't we go out and actually physically attack somebody and try and make a point and make a statement? And there's always been a debate about what's the morally right and wrong thing to do, and there's a frustration as well as a sense of progression almost simultaneously. It's a really good, like, just my favorite characters ever. We've talked about this before, but X-Force is an example of that latter case of that just frustration and that anger that not enough is getting done. And quite a lot of that comes from Cyclops. If you read like his run of, like, he does have a big character development of changing his morals and his philosophy around what mutant kind is like. And X-Force is a result of this. It's an undercover Black Ops group that I think traditionally has always been, I think in the comics it was closer to R-rated than universally rated.
Very violent stuff.
Really violent. And so Rick Remender takes it over with Uncanny X-Force, and the roster's Wolverine, Angel or Archangel, which is Angel after he deals with Apocalypse, where he goes a bit off the wall, a bit mental. Psylocke, who is a super cool, like she's a telepath, but she can also create anything, like psi blades, so she can make a sword out of psionic energy or whatever you want to call it. Deadpool, who actually in his most believable and lovable, like in a way, because Deadpool sometimes I find annoying. I think he's good, but he's annoying. Whereas in this, he weirdly works.
Oh yeah,
he weirdly works as a team member.
He has that kind of comic foil. When you first look at the roster and you see all these kind of quite dark and serious characters, you see Deadpool in there, you think, oh Jesus, that he's going to be a comic foil, and he really isn't.
He's really not.
He has that to begin with, but then you realize,
which again is so
how much he's affected.
So typical of Remender's style of it's not a what if we twisted it? What if we made it different? It's almost like a why is he this way? Why do we like him?
Yeah.
And exposing why we like him, and the reason why we like him is because he's honest.
Yeah.
And he tells the truth. And so when he's in a team situation, when one person is trying to, like round up the troops and say, let's get some goodwill going, let's do this, what else can we do, what else can we do? He's the guy who's going, well, to be honest, we're fucked.
Yeah.
And we are, and that's how he works. He's not necessarily wisecracking, but he's also literally wise. He's like almost, because he has that meta element to him, he cuts through what is a typical hero speech with a comment that basically sums the whole thing up in one panel.
I think you could say that, like, if you were to summarize Deadpool's character in like 4 words, you'd say like he's a lovable psychopath. It's the idea of he's a jokester, but also is like dangerous.
Yeah,
and it's putting him on a team of other extreme dangerous characters that you see how he differs from them. Yeah, and it's really amazing.
And obviously, it's led by Wolverine.
Yeah,
who again has this really interesting dynamic because Wolverine, this sort of job is what he's good at. He is the best he is at what he does, which is killing folks. And so obviously he needs to be the leader of X-Force, but almost more so than Scott Summers and Cyclops, he has a moral compass that says that he has an issue with it all. He doesn't. He kills because he can, but not necessarily because he wants to, and not necessarily because he thinks it's the right thing to do. And after a while, he doesn't think he's getting anywhere because he has that a recurring character trope of all I do is kill, and all I do, and like killing sometimes is the right answer, but I still find I'm killing, so why am I not progressing in a way? So it's that really interesting dynamic of a leader who doesn't necessarily believe entirely in what he's doing, or at least can't find a hope at the end of the tunnel. And that's the sort of stuff that drives, it's a really much more complex characters you get.
Yeah, and I think you could say that's almost a staple of Remender's work as a whole.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
He refuses to let himself be purely optimistic.
Yeah,
at least at this point in his career.
Yeah.
I think you kind of see progression towards that in his work. Later on down the line. And
the final character is Phantom X.
Yeah.
Who is first of all really really cool character. So he is, for those of you who don't know, you don't really know who he is. The whole his whole element is he's
an enigmatic French assassin from the Weapon X program that spawned Wolverine.
Yeah,
but he's created by Grant Morrison.
Yeah, and he's created by Grant Morrison, and it reveals one of the best twists that Grant Morrison ever did, which is I think that he's called Phantom X, but he's also Weapon XIII, making him Weapon 13, meaning that Wolverine is not Weapon X but Weapon 10. As in Roman numerals,
which changes his whole
character. That's a little side note on how great Grant Morrison is about how like you just go, oh, he wasn't necessarily a great superhero or a great super soldier. In fact, he was just version 10 of Captain America. Because Captain America is supposed to be Weapon I. Yeah.
So really.
So there you go. So that's a little trivia. He's a really cool character. I want more Phantom X.
I do too. He got a standalone Max series, I think.
Did he?
I think about 4. Yeah, I think it was one of the first actual comic books I picked up when I started getting into them when I was at college. I started reading all these random series from Image and Marvel, and Phantom X I read a couple of issues of. Really, really weird. I think probably a more toned down version of the character than you or I are used to, but still worth reading. In
a way, like Phantom X, I love X-Men, but I still don't really know what he does or what his powers are. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a sort of idea, but he's the whole point is that he's such an enigma. You hardly ever see him without his mask on.
Yeah.
And it's a full balaclava. But he, in X-Force, he operates sort of as a wild card because you don't really know what he's going to do. Yeah. And as a result, you get from this body of people who you know to be killers. Deadpool and Wolverine make no issue about killing anyone, as we've already said. Phantom X is everything is philosophical, everything is a confusion, everything is a riddle. Thingy Psylocke, quite happy to kill as well. She's like the nature of her powers are that they are quite aggressive and quite violent. Archangel is completely psychotic and completely terrifying and all over the place, and so there's an element, but all these people have a moral compass. That's what makes them interesting. And so a slight spoiler for the start of Uncanny X-Force, but I think the thing that sold it for me is there's an Apocalypse storyline. So Apocalypse being a huge X-Men villain, there's a threat that he might be coming back, and the X-Force team are sent to try and find him, and they spend, say, I think it's about 4 issues battling his goons and battling his horsemen and so on, and they eventually find Apocalypse, and everyone rushes in ready to kill him, and then they stop, and it's a child. And Apocalypse is reborn as a child, and everyone stops because they can't kill him, and then all of a sudden, off panel, you hear a bang, 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 and he's dead, and it's Phantom X who shot him, and he is not the person you thought would make a move like that. And that's a sort of trick that Remender pulls, is that not only does he like invert characters you're used to, but he makes them not do what you expect them to do, or even in the plot he builds up to, we're already, this is a dark storyline, so we're prepared for something bad to happen, and it doesn't happen, and then it does from someone you don't expect.
That's the thing. It's subverting your expectations of I think moral choices more than anything, like the idea that someone would, for example, kill a child. It's never the person you expect, because it's kind of an abhorrible crime. So on this team of psychopaths, who's the most dangerous one, and it turns out to be the one that you didn't know. So Uncanny X-Force, real highlight. I think like I think it's one of the rarest omnibuses out there at the minute. But you can still get it in like complete collections. So I have it in 2 complete collections, which you can buy, and it's a good 40 issues, I'd say, at least. So I would really recommend that run. It's a good way to get into slightly harder Marvel, if that's what you're interested in, or to see, or in fact, if anything, just to see the real potential of what these characters can be. No, that was actually the first time I'd ever read Psylocke, I think.
Really?
Because knowing, I think by that point I already knew Angel / Archangel, but seeing their relationship as characters is really interesting, because they're also both kind of protagonists on the X-Men team. So to see them doing darker stuff is really interesting. A credit to Remender as well.
And it just to go on a little bit with Marvel before we talk about his more independent stuff. He ran Uncanny X-Force right into Uncanny Avengers. So and again, a really interesting choice of author, I think, because Uncanny Avengers immediately follows the Marvel event Avengers versus X-Men. So I won't bother explaining the whole plotline, but basically there's a big divide between the Avengers teams and the X-Men teams over a moral issue about what's right and what's wrong, etc., etc. As you'd expect, it blows up into an all-out fight, and it finishes with pretty much everyone broken up and destroyed, and like the Avengers have taken losses, the X-Men have taken losses. Cyclops gets infected with the Phoenix Force and deluded in his ideas of grandeur about being, and he becomes almost like more radical than Magneto in his idea of like mutant kind and the mutants for mutants only, and just having their own independent nation to themselves, or the fact that they should take their place as Homo superior, and he actually ends up killing Professor Xavier, which is a huge big character moment. And so when you have this new Marvel universe where the X-Men are broken and divided and the Avengers are broken and divided, and how can they possibly work in cohabitation? It seems almost like Rick Remender, for all of his depression and breaking things down and reconstructing them, seems like the last person in the world to write a book about bringing a team together of X-Men and Avengers. And that's exactly what he did, and it is sublime. I loved it.
But I think the thing that it focuses on so much is the impossibility of reconciliation. This idea that the X-Men will never really be the champions or protagonists of the world because of their very nature as mutants, and the Avengers on the team kind of conflicting with that idea, but also acknowledging that they just think differently and act differently.
Yeah.
And their attitude towards humanity and, you know, the idea of being a protagonist.
Yeah.
You know, being a superhero, having to defend everyone unilaterally is kind of impossible by their very nature because they're persecuted so much.
Yeah. And it's full of a team of people who not only are they from broken sides of the same coin, basically, but that they themselves have, you know, have done bad things and have been forgiven.
Sure.
And that's a really interesting thing about, like you said, about reconciliation and about trying to keep together despite being broken. Mm-hmm. Which, because there's a crossover with the all-new X-Men, where, I don't know if you've read this, but so Brian Michael Bendis has a run on X-Men called All New X-Men, where the original 5 X-Men, so Iceman, Jean Grey, Cyclops, Angel, and Beast, are brought forward in time.
Yep.
And they meet up with Uncanny Avengers, and Jean Grey, who's a telepath, obviously, starts having a yelling match with Scarlet Witch because she sees what Scarlet Witch does in her future, which is saying there's no more mutants and killing off, not killing off, but removing the powers of hundreds and hundreds of mutants, and also preventing the development of more mutant kind. And it's a really interesting debate because everybody, including her teacher Kitty Pryde, has to explain to Jean Grey why, even though she thinks that Scarlet Witch is a monster, you have to forgive her. And you have to understand that she did something bad, but she needs a bit of redemption. She needs to be forgiven, and we need to move on from what people did, because basically the idea is that we've all done bad things, but it doesn't make us bad people. Mm-hmm. And that's Remender.
Yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I'm quite proud of that.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, well done to Bendis for, like, we knock him quite a lot, or he not knock him, but he doesn't get he doesn't get given the same depth as Remender does, but sometimes he really does get characters perfectly.
Yeah. Let's move back to, well, I don't really know how to move on from there, but like, I think one of the things that I want to talk about specifically is the way that he appreciates his artists.
Yeah.
You can tell that Remender really loves working with a ridiculous talent of people. So looking at just the lineup of artists he's worked on Uncanny X-Force with, a lot of them he goes on to create standalone series with in Image and Dark Horse as well.
Yeah. So particularly,
well, I want to talk about. Well, I'll just give a list of names. But so if you're listening to this, you should probably Google these names because they're just insanely good artists.
Yeah.
Like Jerome Opeña is one. Isad Ribic, he's worked with for a couple of issues on Uncanny X-Force.
Yeah.
Greg Tocchini as well. And did I say Jerome Opeña?
You said Jerome Opeña, yeah.
Who's the other guy? I've forgotten his name. He did Sean Gordon Murphy? No, he's worked with him as well, but I'm struggling.
Do you mean I can't remember his name. You mean the guy who did Black Science?
Yes.
Bodetti? Or something like that. Anyway, I'll talk about something while Stuart looks something up on his phone.
Yep.
So, I recently reread one of his independent comics, Last Days of American Crime, which I think we'll talk about just now, so we can get into his more independent books. Yeah. And this is his. It's a run he did with Greg Tocchini, who's an Italian artist that Stuart mentioned before. And it's rereading it, I really noticed the amazing technique and work that where he works with his artists so closely together. So, Last Days of American Crime, not my favorite Remender story by any means.
Sure.
It's a 3-part story that's set in a very near future America where crime is so common and so popular that, like, basically all of society is crumbling down and everything's a bit nasty and degraded and bad. They're running and it's building towards this deadline that the new authoritarian US government is passing, which is in a couple of weeks they're going to create a machine that makes crime illegal. Well, not illegal, obviously crime is illegal. It prevents crime from ever happening. So basically, the idea is that it sends out sound waves or microwaves or whatever. It's some science fiction rubbish, but it sends out something that whenever you think you want to make a crime or you know that what you're doing is wrong, you will be prevented from doing it. Like it takes over your mind and stops it. And simultaneously, you have the last use of paper money. So paper money is becoming extinct and everything becomes electronic. And what that means is that once everything's electronic, everything is traceable, everything is detectable, everything is taxable. So there's no, if everything's electronic, there's no way you can hide your payments. And so it's bad for criminals because they can't use dirty money or untraced money to make illicit deals. So the last days of American crime is basically this old hardened criminal and two younger people he teams up with are going to rob the last bank in America that will have dollar bills, and they need to do it before this anti-crime signal gets sent out. My issues with this was that, so we've talked about how Remender really gets into sort of like darker ideas about characters and so on, and it does come from the fact that I believe he did suffer from depression for quite a lot of his professional life.
Very openly talked
he's
about
very openly,
how he's dealt with it.
And I don't believe that should hinder art in any way, but as a reader I just find that this to be almost too depressing and too horrible and dark and terrible. So basically I think I've said this on the podcast before, but I'm fed up with and dislike futures where people are the extremes of one gender. So men are always tough and angry and muscly and anti-heroes in a way, and women are nearly always sex objects. Kind of clever, but sex objects. Which also, just as a side note, is partly why there are issues in Mad Max, but also why Furiosa is such a great character, because she's about the only woman in this sort of post-apocalyptic trend who is not, an extreme of sexual femininity, in the sense of like, I'm worried about what I'm saying, but there's a character Shelby in Last Days of American Crime, and she is always depicted bending over or with like short skirts or high-rise t-shirts, and she's always being flirty or flirtatious or something or the other, and the reason for it is because that's her way to survive in this world. I'm kind of fed up with that depiction of what the future is going to be like. I don't necessarily think there's a need for it. I don't necessarily think that it's true. I think there are other ways to deal with it. That being said, the nature of the story is that everyone is a criminal and everyone is bad, and therefore you don't necessarily know what all the angles are, or how to trust someone or how not to trust someone, or if they're playing a game or whatever, or if they're playing you, or if they're like an undercover cop or something like that. There's always a threat of that, and that is obviously written into the narrative, but also blended amazingly by Greg Ticini into almost every single frame and every single panel. And this is something I've come to understand recently, and something I'm very fascinated by, is not just the theory in comic books, like why something is or why something is, but the technique that's used to support that theory. Okay. So
how do you mean?
So Ticini, in his paneling, in every frame he uses, whenever he has a person, a character on the image, he nearly always has that person reflected, either in a mirror or in a window or something other, or it gets increasingly more subtle. So, for example, there will be a picture of our I've forgotten his name, Graham, I think it is. It's a really boring name, but Graham, our anti-hero, and then there'll be an image of him younger, like in a photo frame next to him, behind him, or there'll be one panel will be of him sort of looking kind of like heroic. He'll be in the light, and the next panel will be of someone else, but you'll be his dark silhouette is shining on top of them. So basically what you get is you get a multi perspective of a character in almost every single frame. So, and what that does is that just quite expertly for me and quite subtly shows the duplicitous nature of every single character. And I think that's a real that's the power that comics can have, and that's the power that visual media can have. Is that there's a reason why these books work as comic books, and why comic books aren't just picture books.
Sure, they're not just like storyboards for a film.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
It's one of those things that only really works in a still image, because, I mean, if you look at something like Batman versus Superman, the frames that work best are the ones that are directly lifted from Frank Miller's Batman.
It's almost like, I think it's a cliche, but where you'll notice the best artists is when an image says as much as it doesn't.
Mm.
So, because an image is it's indicative of something. It's a signifier for something or other. So you can see this even right down to Cheney's colouring. So, brighter lights will mean that there's a more obvious, there's a good thing happening. Darker lights, there's a bad thing happening. And then he, obviously, because of the duplicitous nature of the story and of the characters, he inverts that and he twists that. And there's also sort of a before something happens and an after something happens. So sort of a precursor and then a result. And it's almost as if you leave the middle part out because you don't need to know what's going on. And this actually, I noticed, because I also this week reread Chris Claremont and Frank Miller's Wolverine run, which is about 4 issues long. And Frank Miller is also a genius at this sort of visual art style of telling you enough to keep you entertained, but not enough to keep you guessing and to keep you confused. And it's done purely through drawings. So, for example, Wolverine is breaking into a Japanese palace, and you have 3 panels of guards walking down a corridor and a silhouette of Wolverine in the background, and that's repeated 3 times. And then you have a page of dialogue, and then you go, and then at the end of that page of dialogue, someone calls for the guards, and there's radio silence, and then you turn the page, and it's exact same 3 frames from the previous page of the same corridor scenes, except everybody's dead and there's blood running down the walls.
Sure.
And it's like, I don't need to see Wolverine ripping these people apart because I know what he can do. There is power just in that image.
Sure.
And the power in Tocchini's images is incredible, and it is invaluable to the story. So for all my issues with Last Days of American Crime, without noticing that, you actually lose how complex it is.
Sure.
And that lends, again, to how good a writer Rick Remender is, which is what this podcast is about. But if you want to get into him, that is not the place I would start. So if you did want to get into his more independent stuff...
I would start with Black Science, personally, which, I mean, I think a general thing to talk about Remender's work is that almost all of it involves, in some way or another, a futuristic depiction, almost always a dystopia, actually, as far as I can remember. Well, just not the mic there. If I was to synopsize Black Science, it's about a guy who creates a monolith that allows him to jump into other dimensions, to parallel universes. And the important thing about this is that the world is dying, people's energy needs aren't being met, and he's looking to tap into other worlds to get infinite energy, basically. To mooch energy off other people, which is sort of, questionable moral to begin with. He does this with his wife and kids.
Which is a
really interesting dynamic, because it's about Grant, the main guy. I think you could call him the main guy. I'm not really sure what the series is right now in terms of... Well, basically, it branches off into lots of alternate reality stuff where he keeps popping up and he meets different versions of himself. And they've all done the same thing, and they're all broken men. Yeah,
if you know Rick and Morty does a similar thing of there is an infinite number of Ricks, and they go off and or in fact, also so does Fantastic Four, where there's an infinite number of Reed Richards. It's that sort of multi-dimensional quantum physics idea.
Yeah. I think the thing that works really well about that series in particular is the sense of motion. I think it's Matteo Scalera does the art.
That's it. That's the guy to remember.
I looked it up just there.
All right, I see. Okay.
But Matteo Scalera's art is balls to the walls, high octane as fuck. Everything is so fast.
It's so
very pointed lines.
Almost cartoonish.
Yeah.
Almost cartoonish, but not quite.
But the tone of it is very dark and sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Not solipsistic, but it's, I guess, nihilistic, because it's sort of a guy struggling with the idea that if every version of him has done the same thing as he's traveling through what's known as the onion of the multiverse, peeling back another layer and seeing what's underneath.
Which also is indicative of his character development, Remender's character development, and everything that we've just talked about.
Exactly. But if every version of him has made the same mistakes and is as flawed or more flawed than the next, how can he possibly be any better? And likewise, how can his children or his wife react in any way differently to him if he acts the same way?
Yeah, so again, to talk a little bit about the artist and the technique the artist uses, what you were saying about what sort of person is he? And he's almost discovering everything about himself whilst it's happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So he's discovering that there are versions of himself that are evil and are bad at the same time as he's making immoral decisions. And it's that, in a way, you could argue this is Rick Remender's version of Reed Richards, so Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four.
He's said a couple of times actually that his ideas for Black Science came from a Fantastic Four pitch that he didn't end up doing.
Yeah, oh really?
So it is that idea.
Which is really interesting because it sort of takes what Jonathan Hickman has been doing with Reed Richards, which is which is sums up in the simple sentence of, what if the cleverest man on earth is wrong? And it's the sort of thing of, what if the cleverest man on earth is wrong and also because of that gives up and becomes bad. And if you look at Matteo, what's his last name again? Scalero. If you look at his sort of character breakdowns on, like, if you ever get trade paperbacks of comic books or even any version of, like, basically collected forms of comic books, you often get artist notes and
like a
sketchbooks and so on. And there was one I remember reading where it's sort of image of I've forgotten his name.
Are you talking about the main guy?
Yeah.
Grant.
I do love comic books, by the way. I'm a massive fan.
Yes,
I read so many that you forget their names.
Yeah.
Grant. And it's sort of like, he wanted him to look like a hero, but he's slightly disproportionate.
Yeah.
And so his legs are almost too long, and he has a very long, hooked, pointed nose. Yeah. And the whole point is that it's slightly off kilter. And I think that's just so subtle, but so clever in the sense of, like, here's a man in a hero stance, but, like, he's almost cartoonish. He's almost like something out of The Incredibles in a way. You know, like one of the villains from the first villain in The Incredibles, the French guy. He's got really long legs and a hooked nose, and he's slightly cartoonish, slightly funny, but slightly sinister. And the point is that he's none of these things and all of these things.
Yeah, it's sort of the idea that he's too spindly to be a protagonist, I think.
Yeah.
You know, you almost don't trust someone who's diving through doing all this crazy adventure stuff with these ridiculous creatures and really, really cool technology and things. But also, you almost don't believe that he has the physical power to do it. Also, just narratively, it's really clever and it lends itself to a really good thing in the sense that, like, Remender won't get lost in a long storyline because once you set up the rules of the world, which is that we can travel in between different dimensions as often as we can, he can just start a storyline in the middle of an adventure. So, like, I believe that the second trade of Black Science, like, you actually almost, the audience is out of loop, out of sync with the characters because they've just jumped a whole, like, further dimensions in the middle of, like, a Roman arena.
And the whole point is that for no reason. Well, I mean, there'll be an element of narrative in it because he's a good enough storyteller, but also I think it's kind of because he was like, I want to do a story set in a Roman arena. Black Science can do it because by the rules of his own world, it makes sense. Yeah,
it has unlimited potential.
Yeah, so I think they wake up in a version of Earth where the Roman Empire still exists.
Yeah. It's a really fantastic series in terms of just a lot of what-if questions. Not a lot of resolutions, but just really, really strong characters at the heart of that as well.
And also, I think the element, the fact that it is literally a family is interesting because a family, for all that they will be friends, will have tensions that, you know, because everyone in comic books talks about in their team, they say, we are a family. So, but you are friends. You are you're not blood relations. And you have that, you don't have that extra layer of jealousy and of family dynamic and of, like, the good and the bad, which every family has. And because at the end of the day, friends are out for each other to look after each other, whereas families, like, they have to be together. And almost in a way, that's great.
It's more of an antagonist than any actual supervillain could ever be.
And, like, everyone talks about the Fantastic Four as being a super family, but there's only two people who are related.
Well, hang on. Who?
Well, Sue and Johnny.
Oh, I see. You're talking blood relations.
Yeah, blood relations is what I mean. Yeah.
Well, unless you're talking about the Future Foundation, in which case it's...
Yeah, okay, fine. But you know anyway, what I
mean. So another thing I just want to mention very briefly is that, like, we've talked about Rick Remender and his pairings with artists. He clearly has such a ridiculous respect for the artist because one of the things that for every single collection he has, or at least that he's been in charge of the kind of collected editions for, so Fear Agent and Black Science and, you know, all his work at Image, his independent stuff, he has, like, a super oversized version hardcover. which is like library edition, massive, way bigger than Omnibus or other oversized hardcovers. And that clearly shows how much he respects his artist, because he thinks the only way that people are going to appreciate this is if they have it as big as possible, so that you can catch all of the details. All of it.
It's something I definitely want to get, because at the minute I'm happy getting just trades, because Image, like, top tip for people who are trying to get into comics, Image, like, quite nicely will sell you books very cheaply compared to other publishers, especially Marvel.
Yeah, Marvel are completely ridiculous
how much they charge sometimes, but Image do occasionally do nice oversized covers, especially with the Rick Remender books, and there's something I might need to try and invest in, I think, because they're nothing I've ever tried before. Do you want to just go through a couple of highlights of his other stories before we finish? Because I think that's the main, what is so good about Rick Remender, I think.
Another story I want to talk about is his work on Fear Agent, which is a story,
again, something I haven't read.
Published by Dark Horse. He worked with, I think it's Tony Moore.
No, it's Opeña again.
It's Jerome Opeña and a guy called Tony Moore who did the first 10 issues of Walking Dead. And it's a series about a guy who's kind of lost in space with his spaceship, who's a sentient being, and he's an alcoholic. And that clearly has a lot of standing with Remender already. But it's a kind of pulpy sci-fi to begin with that breaks down very quickly into, oh Jesus, I really am the last man out of the sea. What the hell am I going to do? How am I going to live?
Which is actually really interesting, because I don't know if you knew this, but Rick Remender wrote Dead Space, the video game.
Did he?
Yeah, he did.
All of it? Because Warren Ellis, I'm sure, wrote a lot of it as well.
No, I don't know if he wrote all of it, but he is definitely...
A lot of comic book writers wrote on Dead Space.
He's definitely credited as the writer on Dead Space.
Really interesting.
Yeah, but that's just Fear Agent, the movie, the game even.
Well, I mean, not so much.
Not quite. I mean, this is me just hearing your synopsis of it. But so Dead Space, for those you don't know, really good, very, very terrifying game of where you are you're an engineer. You're an engineer
fixing a spaceship.
That's full of ghosts, basically. Yeah.
Terrifying game, actually.
Yeah.
And probably really, in retrospect, one of the best plotted video games I've ever played, in terms of pacing.
Again, tells you something about the sheer possibility of visual storytelling.
Yeah.
Just a little plug for anyone hating on comic books.
Yep. Well, I mean, surely they wouldn't have sat through this whole thing.
Well, you never know.
Like comic books.
You never know who's listening.
Anyway, what was I going to say? I can't remember. I think just the thing I love about Fear Agent is that it's about a guy coping. He's called a fear agent because he's kind of an exterminator for alien races and things out in the middle of space. But actually, he's coping with his own personal fears, and it's that double entendre name, which is so amazing. And it's just a credit to Tony Moore and Jerome Opeña and Remender that they managed to create this kind of three-part relationship that is perfect.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Remender's science fiction is not... Excuse me, I got a bit of a blocked nose. It's not like your Philip K. Dick, which is actually pushing the bounds of what storytelling can be, and or what the idea of added technology can do to your storytelling. In a way, the science fiction element is almost secondary to the plot, but it's a new way of asking questions of the characters or putting them in situations, because science fiction, so regular fiction, say, can ask what if questions about the future or about a character or ask hypothetical questions of what would you do in this situation. Science fiction can literally put you in that situation, and it's that use of science fiction rather than an exploration of
what science will
become or anything like that.
That's the thing. It's taking characters, familiar faces and tropes from regular fiction, the domestic problems, problems with alcoholism, problems with depression, these kinds of things, and transporting them to another dimension, usually of solitude, actually, and saying, what would you do if you were at your lowest point?
So, for example, to go back to Black Science, Grant is stuck with the idea of he's realizing he's in a universe where he will do everything, and he has done everything. And also, so when he's struggling with his own issues, he sees the worst versions of himself and the best version of himself, and that sort of puts him in an interesting situation.
It's where do I fall on the spectrum?
All the slight spoilers with Black Science, but all the characters in it are selfish in one way or the other. And so if you live in a universe of infinite realities, it essentially gives you time travel, because you can travel to a dimension where something bad you did never happened.
Sure.
And that's the way the science fiction is used, to make sense. I also want to talk about Low, which is one of the best books I think I've ever read, hands down. I don't understand it entirely yet. I need to reread it and reread it. But it's one of those books where I bought it, I sat down and I read the whole thing in a day, and I just remember being blown away by it in the sheer emotional rawness. And I think this is where Remender, for me at least, is currently at his best, because he has this amazing introduction that he does where he says, look, I suffered really badly from depression, and I'm sort of in the ends of it now, and I'm kind of getting over it, and I found it in this character.
Yeah.
And it's the idea about Low is that it is another post-apocalyptic world where humanity has to move below the surface into the oceans, and they live in the oceans. And there's your main character, again, I'm going to forget her name, which is terrible, but this main character, she witnesses her husband, her 2 daughters, and her son they're all out one day on a family trip, and her husband is killed and her 2 daughters are kidnapped, supposedly dead to the world, and all this happens in one day, and then she has to live with it for the rest of her life, and then the next issue jump cuts something like 15 years, and it's how the woman has still how she has survived. And it's a really interesting thing because she's just a big metaphor and a symbol for hope and for optimism.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's
no matter
kind of the ultimate optimistic book.
Yeah, no matter how horrible or how terrible her life is, she still manages to find, even in the deepest, darkest places, manages to find a way to carry on. And it's that really clever, really typical Remender trick of inverting what you think is going to happen.
Sure.
And so, if he's a writer known for depressing books and depressing storylines and finding something bleak and dark even in the situations you never expected to find bleak and darkness, he also tricks himself and finds hope and happiness in the literal and that's not without its bleakness, because her son turns into a pretty horrible person because of what's happened to his sisters and his father, as you'd expect. And then the story, the book almost expands a bit like Game of Thrones in a way, in the sense of, you follow a character for a certain amount of time and then it actually jump cuts to a whole other different character, and you realize it, and spoilers, but it follows the life of the daughters and what happens to them and what happened to them, and how they've coped despite all this horribleness that's happened to them and what they want to do. And it's quite an amazing book, and the overarching plotline is this woman is a scientist who believes she's found a way of curing the atmosphere on Earth so that humans can live again, but she has to get to the surface. So she is literally climbing from the bottom of the ocean to the surface. And it's just, obviously that's a on the nose metaphor, but it just, as a narrative drive, it works amazingly well for everything else. And it's this sort of thing of he has an idea and a theme that he wants to do, he subverts it, and everything, including his artist, because it's Tocchini again, and this is why I want to reread it after having read Last Days of American Crime. I want to see how Tocchini adds his own style to this narrative. Everything follows what Remender wants to do, and it's just brilliant. It's a really, really good book.
Cool. Well, I think that's quite a good place to stop.
Rick Remender, pretty great.
Hopefully we've encouraged you guys to maybe have a look at some of his work.
I cannot recommend it highly enough. I'm currently reading, last little thing, I'm currently reading Seven to Eternity, which has not been out long enough, I think, to really make an impression of it all. But it's interesting in that it's Jerome Pena again, one of his favorite artists, so you know that there's going to be something good out of that, because the two of them are clearly friends and they work well together. They have the same sort of ideas.
I want to mention as well, he always, or not always, but he's worked a lot with the same colorist, a guy called Matt Hollingsworth, who does most of his colors. So it's interesting to see that color actually seems to be a very large part of his design approach, particularly knowing that this one guy reflects his interior mood very well, color-wise. So that's really interesting too.
And just the last little point to make, in case, because in case you didn't get all the things we've been saying about him, there's a really interesting thing that I noticed, or rather we noticed recently, where there was a movie that came out called Bone Tomahawk, which is a really good movie, by the way. You should go and see it. And the poster for that is a large sort of landscape image. It's a portrait image, but of a landscape, if that makes sense. Yeah, and in sort of smallish writing at the bottom, it has the title, and that's it. So the image takes over the page, and it's just like, that's the title. And for some reason, which I still can't quite figure out why, but Remender has chosen that template for the cover of every single issue of Seven to Eternity. Yeah,
I wonder if it's one of those things that's more of a classic Western thing.
The thing is, so like,
but I don't know.
So Seven to Eternity, as I was saying, is a slight change for him in that it's a fantasy world rather than a science fiction world. And yes, there is an element of a Western in it, but also Lord of the Rings in the sort of sense of like the main character is a bit of an Aragorn, who I suppose in a way you could argue is a bit of a cowboy or is a bit of this, or in the same sort of sense of a Western. But what I take from it is that it's just another example of how he's influenced by movies and how he's influenced by images and how he uses that to tell stories.
Yeah, actually, there's one of those things as well. At the end of every one of his single issues, what he'll often do is have a kind of soundtrack list of what he's been listening to recently and how it's clearly affected his writing, which I think is really interesting. Yeah. He's obviously someone that pays a lot of attention to oral media as well as visual, and incorporates that as well into his design. So that's cool.
I guess just to if you can Jesus Christ,
if you can conclude
him, it would be to say that I think he's an incredible writer, and works so well in comics because it's not necessarily narrative driven, it's not necessarily character driven, it's incredibly visually driven. Which feeds off everything else, and it's just a different way to tell a story, and I think it's brilliant.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening.
See you next week. We might have a guest on next week.
I probably won't be here, so...
Okay, so we'll see who comes on.
Yeah.
Okay,
see
you later, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.